Welcome to Faith Between the Lines. My name is Scott. And this podcast is about the spaces we don't always talk about. The grief we carry, the hope we cling to, and the faith that holds us together when life feels broken. My wife Kathy and I lived through more tragedy than most people could imagine. She came from a family of 9, and by the time she was 62, she was the last one left. On my side, I came from a family of 6, and today, only my older sister and I remain. Some of our loved ones were taken in horrific accidents, others by illness. But we knew grief early, and we knew it deeply. But through it all, Kathy and I leaned on our faith and on each other. For a little over 50 years, I worked as a logger. Kathy worked as a grocery clerk. And in our spare time, we raised and trained and rebred American quarter horses. We showed horses through California, Oregon, Texas, and Oklahoma. We were fortunate enough with our bloodline to win 6 world championships in halter disciplines, even though they were working cow horse bred. We lived life with tenacity, and we lived life with grace. And when Kathy passed, I found myself at a loss for words, until I realized the words were already inside me. I've written over 1,000 poems and hundreds of short little stories, and now I would like to share some of them with you. This podcast isn't about polished speeches or perfect answers. It's about honesty. It's about the gut punch of grief and the quiet strength of faith. It's about reminding you that you are not alone, because every one of us will face death, both in grieving and in dying. And in those moments, faith between the lines is what carries us. I want to share a little story about my wife, Kathy. She went through more in her life than most people could imagine. Back in 2007, while training, she was thrown off of one of her horses and broke her back in 3 places, got a compound fracture of her femur, broke her hip, and broke 5 ribs. After all the surgeries, I started calling her Little Titanium because of all the rods and the pins and the bolts that held her together. But even through all that metal in her body and everything, bracing her up, she still lived with chronic pain. And for the next 17 years, she managed it with the help of a pain management doctor. She handled it with toughness. It still amazes me to this day. That little lady was the definition of strong. In the summer of 2023, she started having trouble just walking through the barn, walking up the hill a little bit or out into the pasture. So I went to a doctor, and the doctor referred her to another doctor at UCSF, where she was diagnosed with severe arteriosclerosis. She went through surgery where they placed stents in both femoral arteries and the aortic branch stent. They put her on a whole list of blood thinners and medications. In February 24th of 2024, her sister passed away on the operating table in San Francisco during an emergency surgery after a massive heart attack. The very next night, on the 25th of February, Kathy collapsed at the dinner table, went into respiratory arrest. And I just grabbed her and started CPR on her, got her breathing again. She just woke up and looked at me and said, "What?" I just picked her up and grabbed her, ran out to the front seat of the car and put her on the front seat of the car and drove to the emergency room, where they performed life-saving measures to get her blood pressure back up. After testing her, they discovered that she was in septic shock. And within 12 hours after that, she went back into respiratory arrest again and was intubated. So I started calling the doctors. I called UCSF and back to her surgeon that was there and told him what was going on. I wanted her transferred out of the hospital here in Fort Bragg immediately. But yet it took days going through the paperwork and the insurance stuff. They had to get a bed, so on, so on. But finally, she was transferred. And after 3 more days in ICU at UCSF, she came off the ventilator. They moved her from the ICU ward into a critical care ward right next door. And within 12 hours, she went into cardiac arrest. She developed what they called Takotsubo syndrome. It's the left ventricle of the heart. It's what they call broken heart disease. I mean, I'd never heard of it before. I mean, I've heard the term, but the doctors asked me what I wanted to do, so I told them she'd never had any heart disease before. That's full court press, man. So they said, okay. So they put her on full life support, kidney machine, lung machine, everything. 4 days later, she started to come around. She started to come off the life support. All of her vitals started to change in. They had her on a heparin drip, and she was doing really good. She was up talking and everything after about 5 days. It was a pretty rough day, though. The first day she came off the intubator, but she was fighting. The next day I was sitting in the room talking to her, and she just went out like a light. She had an aneurysm in the left lung. It was rushed in emergency surgery where they placed a stent and a coil in the mammary artery. She came out of that, was intubated for 2 days, was doing pretty good, up talking, getting ready to be released out of the ICU. She had a blood vessel in her stomach blow out. And she lost half the blood in her body and was rushed into surgery again where she was stapled together and closed up. She spent 41 days at UCSF. And every day I drove back and forth from Fort Bragg to UCSF. I leave home around 12:30 at night, get down to the parking garage on Parnassus and sleep for a couple hours. I'm sure there's been many of you that have probably done the same thing. I'd go in there and meet with the team, talk to what we're going to do, advocate for her, and then try to leave there by around 11 o'clock in the morning or 12 at the latest. I'd drive home, I'd come home, feed all the animals, clean the stalls, just do what I had to do with the animals and stuff, get an hour or so of sleep and something to eat, and then I would leave again. Every evening she went through the same thing at the hospital. She started to do pretty good, and she was starting to come out of it and everything. Eventually she got to come home. She was better than anyone expected, even me. I mean, I was surprised. She was up walking around and almost acting like nothing had happened. I told her 4 different times her sister had passed away. She didn't remember any of the events that happened the day before she collapsed at home or anything. She didn't remember anything. But when she came home, she had a few conditions. She had AFib. She was on all kinds of blood thinners, a mild heart condition, other complications, but she was alive. And for a while, she was doing pretty good. But around October to November, I started noticing small changes. And by December of 2024, I started noticing even bigger changes. She wasn't eating. She lost interest in things. She used to enjoy, I took her to all of her doctor's appointments, get her hair done and all that stuff. Every time she went to the doctor and got her lab work and stuff, it came back clean. Doctors were amazed at her strength. Would tell me, you guys are doing great. Scott, you're doing good. Kathy, you're doing great. But I could see something they couldn't. She was slipping. She'd always been tiny. Heck, she was only around 90 pounds to begin with. But when she dropped down to about 82, I started to worry more. I took her back to the doctor about every 2 weeks. They were checking her for everything they could. And by May, she was down to 77 pounds. She was forgetting little things, struggling with the little things, like the simple tasks, like the remote control and stuff. And she was the whiz at the dish remote, you know. I touch it and change the channel. I got little boxes floating all over. She'd grab and say, give me that thing. You know, she's got stuff recorded and super good at jigsaw puzzles. She was putting pieces in upside down and everything. It was really weird watching this kind of a regression. Now, on June 12th, I came in the house and found Kathy lying on the floor. She had her life alert around her neck and a cell phone sitting on the table, but she didn't remember anything. So I picked her up and I rushed her to the emergency room. Blood test showed that she had sepsis again. And the CT scan that they did showed that she had significant brain atrophy from a previous stroke. Something neither one of us had ever been told, that she'd ever had a stroke. Even though she was released from the hospital before, she'd had 3 or 4 CTs of the brain and there was never any signs of any stroke. They told us both that she would need intensive rehab to relearn basic things like swallowing and walking and all that. And she was doing all that before she got to the hospital with this sepsis this time. During the 5 days in the ICU, I kept thinking, God, this explains everything. The symptoms, the changes. But when I look back at all of her tests from the year before, there had been no sign of any stroke, none. So after 5 days, they moved her to the regular hospital floor, into a regular room. And within 17 hours, they found a nursing home in Willits that would take her. I was surprised because before, when we wanted a transfer, it was always jumping through the hoops with the insurance, and it was a pain in the butt. I wanted her to stay longer, but they told me she needed intensive therapy for the atrophy from the stroke, and that they typically like to discharge within 24 hours. I was pretty reluctant. I really was, because I advocated so strongly for her, but it started to kind of make sense. So she was transported to Willits, and almost immediately she started going downhill. She arrived late in the evening. The next morning when I got there after going home, I saw the changes in her right away. She was nonverbal, curled up in a fetal position and bleeding from every crease in her skin. She had bitten right through the end of her tongue is what it looked like to me. I reached inside of her mouth trying to talk to her, and I was pulling pills out that were underneath her tongue that the doctors had given her, or the nurse's aides or whatever, just from previous before. They told me, don't ever stick your finger in the tongue of somebody that's had a seizure. I was flipped. I told them, you get a doctor here to immediately, or I'm calling 911. I marched right out into the hallway and got the supervisor and told him what was going on. They told me the doctors come on Wednesdays and Fridays. Your wife just got here. And I said, you know what? You don't get a doctor, I'm calling 911. So they got a doctor there. The doctor showed up. They drew blood. About 6 o'clock in the evening, they called and they said that Kathy was positive for sepsis again. They sent in an ambulance and took her to the ER. There, after the blood tests and everything came back, they found that her sugar level was down to 35, and she was in liver failure and kidney failure. And at that point, I wanted her on comfort care. They argue with me saying that people can go through this for months. And I told him specifically, she's in her last hours of life. She is dying. I want to speak to your supervisor. About 45 minutes later, the supervisor came in and asked me a few questions, evaluated Kathy, read her chart, looked at her last year and a half of medical records, and agreed with me and told me, I'll have a room for you. So around 1 a.m., they got her up into a room. That was on June 20th. At 9 a.m., Kathy passed away with me at her side. Before comfort care, she was trapped in a fight and flight mode. It's an awful place for anybody to be in, and for that little lady of mine. But when comfort care began, she passed with no pain, no suffering, and at ease, and I never left her side. When her body finally failed her, and the hospital failed her, I did not. I leaned on my faith to help her through the hardest thing a person will ever face. And now you know the story of my wife, Kathy. I would like to share with you a poem that I wrote for Kathy about a week and a half after she passed away. That was before I had the service for her. There was a lot of feelings going through me at the time, and you can imagine, being with somebody for over 50 years, been married for almost 44. When your soul gets ripped out, when it's your real soulmate, and that person is ripped from your soul, and what you feel like. And this is a poem that I wrote. It's called Let Me Lay It Down. I carried the silence, I carried the storm. I carried her body when it couldn't stay warm. I carried the guilt like a stone in my chest, though all that she needed was comfort and rest. I didn't have angels or heavenly signs, just minutes that twisted and fractured time. But I stood by her side as her breath slipped away, and I whispered, "It's okay, love. You don't have to stay." I gave her to God with a tremble and tear and begged him to take her, to keep her near. Her eyes couldn't speak, but I knew that she knew the depth of my love and what I had to do. So I asked for release, not from love or the past, but from guilt's cruel tether that holds to me fast. She didn't resist. It was more than just fate. It was mercy that opened that final gate. Let the waves come gentle, let the pain recede. Let the grace be the garden and love be the seed. I will not forget her. I will honor her name, but I won't wear the shackles of sorrow or shame. I will speak to the wind, and I believe in the skies. I trust that she heard me through flight and through cries. And maybe someday, in the hush of the breeze, I'll hear her say softly, "Beloved, be free." Before I close today, I want to share something personal with you. I was raised in a Christian home, but like a lot of people, I pulled away from my Bible and routines and rituals. I never stopped believing. I just stopped practicing it and only reached out for God when prayer was needed or when it was convenient for me. But in my early 20s, something happened that changed the way that I understood faith. My wife, Kathy, and I were getting ready to buy a piece of property. We were young, we were broke, and every door seemed to slam shut. I remember being frustrated trying to buy this house. It was a perfect little place, I thought, but we didn't have any money. I would have done anything to get the money, just about. And it sold before we had a chance to even come up with it. But she looked at me one day, about 2 weeks after we were in the process of trying to get this house. And she said to me, "You know what? I have faith in you." This little 93-pound woman had faith in me. To me, that meant a lot. And at the time, I just kind of shrugged it off. But those words stayed with me. A few months later, another opportunity came along. And at that moment, that sentence lit something in me. It carried me for close to 50 years. Faith doesn't always come from a shining light on a mountaintop. Sometimes it comes from a person who believes in you when you don't believe in yourself. Sometimes it comes from inside, from your own spirit. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's small, but it feeds the soul. So if you're listening today and you're searching for faith or trying to understand it, you're not alone. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to take the next step and maybe, just maybe, borrow a little faith from someone who sees something in you. And we can walk through this together. So thank you for spending your time with me on Faith Between the Lines. If today's words touched your heart, remember, you're not alone. Grief and loss visit us all, but so does love, and so does faith. And faith between the lines of sorrow, there's always hope. Until next time, may you carry compassion in your heart, courage in your spirit, and the faith in the spaces between. I'll meet you back here real soon.